Hi, welcome to From Thinking to Inking, Episode 1, Part 4. I'm your host, TJ Mercer, and today we will be continuing our dig into Caitlyn Mitchell's book, Shifted. We get through to Lewis being trapped inside of the house and discuss some of the details inside of said house. Just one quick note of warning about halfway through, the audio changes drastically. This is because we get to a point where the interview was extended to a second day, and on that second day, things changed. I recorded inside of a different room in my house, which made the acoustics different. And I don't know what Caitlyn did. I don't know if she was in the same spot or what, but things were slightly different. I tried my best to make it sound similar, but I could only do so much. Particularly with hers because she had to record it off of her laptop and onto the conferencing web software that I use, and so there were some different kind of ambient noises that were picked up, and so I had to mix her audio differently, which so she actually sounds kind of drastically different. She suddenly becomes more of an alto, and so I'm sorry about that. I tried my best, but you've been warned. So hopefully, it doesn't jar you too much. It's still legible, and it's still a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Um, all right, so he tries to pull her out, and she goes crazy on him and like throws him back. He cracks the skull and uh, wanders back to the town through the rain. And I have to say that this was one of the best perspectives perspective things of having a fever or really
Mm.
bad head injury and fever that I've ever read. I thought was really
Oh,
good. Was
awesome.
was that um, was that hard? Did you like really work on getting that accurate, or was it just kind of instinctual?
Um, well, I would argue it was more instinctual than anything else. I've never had a severe head injury, but I've had very high fevers, and some of them have been very trippy. I remember, boy, this was probably like 7 or 8 years ago. Uh, anyway, I came down with strep throat at one point. And I've had strep throat many, many times. Nothing really crazy, but I developed a very strong fever before we figured out that it was strep throat, and I had some of the craziest, trippiest nightmares that were very visceral because even in the nightmare I could feel the pain I was in, and every shock of pain caused, you know, explosions of light or gears or bizarre world changes in the dream I was having. So, um, I was kind of pulling from experiences of that where your world is you're linked to the pain you're in or the physical sensations you've got, but it's all twisted and wrong, and you don't really realize how twisted it is until you get on the other side of it and you're like, whoa, that was kind of intense right there. um and I imagine that having a head injury is, if you're not just unconscious, it probably has very similar um, effects, just based on reading about various uh, other experiences people have had. So mostly the fever was what I was focusing on. But yeah, partial uh, uh, self experiences and partial just imagination, and kind of tying in the whole description of magic with a more realistic experience, and how the kind of perceptions can slide against each other in that way.
Cool. So he because he has that head injury, he's basically out of commission for several months. Um,
Hmm.
why did you decide to basically take the character out of the story for such a long period of time?
Um, it gave him some space, frankly. And you know, he's been living at an untenable pace, you know, trying to take care of his aunt, trying to take care of business, and him getting ill and being forced to let other people take care of him not only helped reorient his perspective of life at that time, but also gave him a lot of time to start thinking about Bree and, you know, the way the world has changed on him. Um, so I think that's really where I was at there. I also wanted a little bit of time to pass before he went back to the house, um, because anybody who, you know, he's to date been a very pragmatic person, and I think he would have needed time to come to the conclusion that all wasn't part of my fever or my illness. Something really happened there, and it's bugging him, and it's bugging him for a decent amount of time, and he can't do anything about it. And anytime you've got something on your mind that you really want to act on, but you're held to inaction for a period of time, it just grows and grows and grows. So all that time he's spent, you know, waiting, his desire to get back there and see what's going on and do something about it is only growing. Where, you know, if he'd gone home and you know, gotten right back to it, he might have just gone back into the routine. He wouldn't have been given any breathing room to start thinking about what if. You know, because there's business to take care of, there's tea parties to go back to, and then all of a sudden it's been 3 years, and oh yeah, I wonder whatever happened to that girl. Um, so it was a bit of elbow room for his him to grasp what just happened.
Also during this part, like a lot of his uh, at the time issues, like his business being run into the ground and all this stuff. It kind of, I'm not accusing you of I'm not accusing you of anything, but it kind of fixes itself while he's unconscious.
Hmm.
Partially
Hmm.
because Jared is actually very good at the stuff that he hates.
Yeah.
Was that intentional so that he could focus on the regular story, or did you have another reason
It's
for it? Or
yeah, it's a bit of there's many of the fairy tale, the Beauty and the Beast stories that I've read, it kind of goes like that, where, you know, there's a period of there's a very prosperous family, or at least a family that's very happy and very normal, and then there's sudden tragedy, and that is what pushes them to the brink, as it were, and all of a sudden, you know, this monster and this impossible deal is is you know, feasible, you know, as opposed to if they were rich, or if they were, you know, doing well, it might be, you know, we can figure this out some other way. But they're really pushed to the brink of, this is the only way that you can keep the family together, or that you can survive. And then in the course of the story, once the beauty character meets the beast character, and usually, you know, is at the palace, things start to get better, things start to improve, to be taken back to where they used to be, and to the level of prosperity that they once had. um, and part of that, you know, seems to be the influence of, sometimes it's the influence of the magic, you know, kind of as a reward for, oh, you know, you gave up your youngest daughter, you're going to be rich again, you're going to be, you know, well off again. It's kind of just um, the ebb and flow of this curse. And so this was following that cycle of doing pretty good, everything's fine, sudden horrible tragedy, meet the beast. This aspect of magic gets created and started, and then life starts to improve again. And the only difference here, you know, in my story to the regular fairy tale, is that Lewis is still on the outside to experience it himself, as opposed to, you know, seeing it from inside the spell, or you know, the beast saying, oh, I'm gonna send money to your family, and you know, take care of them, essentially. It's not what you think. So all of this starts to improve. And one could argue also, in it's kind of the way it is in real life. Things don't necessarily stay bad forever. Um, Sometimes they get really, really bad really fast, and it's really hard to imagine everything turning out okay. And then it usually does. So both a reflection of the kind of usual fairy tale arc, and also, life just recovering. People go about their business, and friends step in to help, family, support you, and you get back to your new normal.
Also, it gave him more to give up later.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
whereas if his life still kind of sucked, it would have been like, yeah, may as well give this a shot.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, and during this period, Lewis starts he like leaves stuff inside of the manor. I guess almost like
Hmm.
as an experiment to see if she can take it. I guess, or maybe like his weird way of testing if it was real.
Yeah, and he's it's at the very, very smallest level a form of courtship. That very initial experience, I said, was setting the stage for the relationship that they will eventually develop. And he can't get this girl out of his mind. And he feels a bit like he's wronged her, because he, caused her so much pain thinking he could get her out so easily, and it wasn't possible. And he's also left her. All of a sudden, he shows up and then he's gone again. So he's not only, seeing, did I imagine this? Did this really happen? But also it's, kind of a peace offering. He wants to get to know her, and see what's really going on, and leaving the little gifts is a way of doing that without necessary, because at this point, I don't know that I explicitly say it, but the idea is if he went in the front door, she wouldn't answer him. She wouldn't show up. She would ignore him. He'd be wandering around a house all by himself with nothing to show for it. So him leaving little gifts, she can either acknowledge it or ignore it. And the first one, she kind of ignores, but then slowly starts to take the gifts, and they start to disappear. And then eventually, he drops one off, and there she is. So it's this slow kind of um, testing the waters of getting back to where they were, before his injury, and being ill for so long.
Was so with that first big gift when he actually shows up at the door. It was there any significant reason that you picked Christmas, or was it just convenient for the story?
I think it just was convenient for the story. And that's a gift giving season, and to date he's been giving her little nonsense things, and it kind of also is a nobody wants to be alone on Christmas type thing. And so that would be a time when he would be thinking about, the family he lost, and other people who have lost, and oh, she's lost, but she's got no one. I've got Jared, I've got Ava, I've got my aunt, I've got a whole town full of people. She's all by herself. So he really feels like now's the time to go, uh, and really step up his game, and try to be there. Um, so that's kind of where all the whole Christmas aspect of it came. And I don't know it necessarily needed to be Christmas, but that's just the biggest gift giving celebration I'm aware of that would also be celebrated in a English setting. If this was a different um, country, it might have been a different holiday, but that one is the big one. So
Yeah, I'm working on a fantasy that takes place in a whole new, completely different world, and I almost used as a description of being like some group's Christmas. And I was like, and I had to pause. And I was like, wait, Christmas doesn't exist here. Um,
oh yeah, yeah, that's really hard to avoid those modern references in a world that doesn't have them. Yeah, that's tough.
so then the next chapter is spring, uh,
Mm.
and this is when he gets trapped, essentially. Uh, but one thing that you did as a foreshadowing that I thought was really cool, um, and I'm not even sure if you meant to do it, but when you were describing all of the things that were happening in spring, like
Hmm.
there were more foals born, people were getting married all over the place. Um, it was funny because it was all things that sounded good or that were good, but you listed so many of them that it started to sound wrong. Like
Yeah.
something was up.
Yeah.
Um, it was. I just thought that was a cool thing that you managed to do because you made things that are good sound ominous.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely meant to be, uh, something's in the air, and whether it's good or bad, you know, will come clear. And yeah, it was definitely meant. There's a stirring in the air. There's something happening to the curse, and that's what draws Robin's attention. Um, because for the past 2 centuries nothing has happened. It's all been nice and tidy, and she's suffering and good. And all of a sudden somebody's poking at the spell and it's starting to get loose, and I'm going to go find out what's going on. So yeah, definitely all of that good stuff, the growth and the 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 warm air and all of these wonderful things. It's like, what's happening? And yeah, definitely a matter of, it seems really great, on the outside, but um, there might be a little bit of um, mystery to it, of what's actually causing all this to happen. And that's like I think I said, much earlier, when we were talking about the kind of fairies and the kind of magic I like, where there's definitely a kind of feral but beautiful quality to it. Spring is my absolute favorite season, but you with that come spring thunderstorms, which can be really violent. And yeah, definitely that kind of uh, uh, ominous beauty, I suppose, is what I was going for here, where it could be really good or it could be a sign of something's on its way and we don't really know what yet.
This is when he brings Jethro, and he gets Jethro to touch her, and all just everything goes crazy. But also, you build up and explain their building relationship. Why did you choose books and horses as the connection? Did that come
Um,
out of the fact that you'd made him a printer, or and a horse keeper, and you're just like, oh, this is a good idea to have, or
well, the I would say that the books and horses were first in my mind, and then the printer and horse farm at the beginning were the more conscious choice to lead up to that. And part of that is, books are very important to me, obviously, as a writer and as a reader. I find that, there's a line that Lewis says a couple of times where he's like, books are as close to magic that this world will ever get. And I kind of feel that, but for him, it becomes a false statement because magic is real in this world. And I love horses. They're my favorite animal in the whole world. I find them very magical in their own way. And there's a little bit of an homage going there. One could question homage, rip off, I don't know. But my favorite Beauty and the Beast story by Robin McKinley, there's a horse involved, and very presence of this animal is questioning the power of the curse, because the beast is this ultimate predator. No animal will go near it. And I wanted to explore that idea myself. In Robin McKinley's book, the horse is really just a method by which, the Beauty and the Beast character bond and get to know each other and break down the barriers of their relationship, which I found very effective and beautiful. And I wanted to see the horse do that, but also start to break down the barriers of the spell. So when Jethro touches her, something in the spell breaks or shifts. And that is ultimately the thing that's like Robin knows something's going on, because they're pushing on the laws of nature, where a prey animal will willingly approach and engage with the ultimate predator. Um, so it could have been any animal, but I love horses. I really love describing horses. and if I could own a horse, I would have one. That's another animal that I would love to add to my menagerie. And horses and books being kind of elements of magic in this the real world. I feel very comfortable making them elements of true magic in a fantasy world.
Hmm. So, question I forgot to ask. Going back, why did you choose for him to bring her birds? Why was that the animal that you went with?
Oh, that is a good question. Why birds? I don't know that it was uh, a conscious decision in this regard, but one can make a uh, parakeet in a coal mine comparison. Where obviously miners would take canaries or other birds down to keep an eye out for dangerous gases. And so in that regard, little birds in cages have been used before as early signs of something wrong. And so, the birds being terrified when they see this seemingly innocuous girl is a sign that
Yeah,
there's
because at
something
this
under
point
the
we don't.
surface.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
don't know what is going on there.
yeah, yeah. Because to Lewis, even though he knows he's seen the magic, he's seen some of her more terrifying forms, he's not yet seen the beast. And so the birds kind of freaking out when she comes close are, they're seeing what's underneath. Kind of in a similar way that, when the horse panics at the very beginning, it's because he can see, or she, it's a mare, can sense what Robin really is beneath the surface. Beyond that, uh, you know, little songbirds in a cage. That's a very, um, I think, common pet of the time, maybe. At least is something you see in like Jane Austen films. There's always a house that's got, a parakeet in a cage. And so it just seemed like a reasonable, portable animal that he could bring that was indeed a pet. It made more sense to me than like a puppy or a cat. Um, she can turn into a cat. She doesn't need a cat. A dog would be more complicated. You can't easily cage a dog, at least in a seemingly ethical way. And so a creature that already comes in a little cage that also mimics the way she feels. So a bird in a bird cage seemed to parallel that.
So after the horse, Robin shows up and he's ticked.
Hmm.
Um, and this is the point where you give all of the detail about the backstory of the curse.
Hmm.
So why did you decide that this is the moment that we need to know? Why did you decide that you need to know that before he goes into the house?
I guess I wanted the readers to have the full understanding of his relationship with Bree before they met again. Because so far we've seen Bree's perspective. We've seen hints of it when he talks to Eyeless, but never anything truly explicit. Um, but I wanted Lewis to before he meets uh, uh, Robin. I wanted him to know exactly who this was, what he's done, how dangerous he is. Because I even show it a little bit in their interaction. Even though he knows, Isla's just told him who he is, he's ready to fight. Even though and part of that is a just a still misunderstanding of what he's really up against. Um, so Eyeless is like, you need to know what's going on now that we've gotten to this point. Um, and I don't know if uh, it was a subconscious. I'm not sure if he'll be able to do anything. Why she didn't tell him earlier? Maybe she didn't want to scare him off this attempt because she wants it broken too. This is a evidence of her failure, of their failure to keep this innocent girl safe and to prevent Robin from causing more destruction. But at this point, there's no getting around telling the story. So yeah, I definitely wanted I wanted Lewis to know what had happened before he met Robin again.
Mm. Um, so when the ripple goes off from the horse touching her, you list a bunch of just random stuff that happened in the forest that signaled that something was wrong. Um, do you happen to remember how you went about just deciding what things to list as the magic affected?
Yeah, it's well, I always imagined that ripple to be kind of like a surge of magic, and anything that has roots or different plants that I associate strongly with magic, like mushrooms. Mushroom rings. That's a pretty big one. Ivy is a very um, I think a very magical kind of plant because it kind of consumes and spreads, and so the mushrooms exploding all of a sudden, the ivy growing. At one, I think there's a little stream that freezes. You know, there is no physical property that can cause a stream, to stop. You can dam a stream, you can block it, but that flow is still going to continue and back up, But in this instance, the water literally stops and then starts again. Kind of like it went into like the forest went into a miniature cardiac arrest. Um, and so those were just aspects of nature that I immediately come to mind when I think about magic interacting with plants and things that if I saw it all of a sudden happen, I'd be like, huh, okay, that's creepy. Because if you saw if you're walking through the woods and all of a sudden you see a whole bunch of mushrooms just pop up, that would be pretty unnerving. Or if you saw, water just stop. Um, and there are any number of things that I could have chosen, but those were the items that immediately came to my mind as being things that uh, I relate to magic and things I would notice in the forest.
Now, Robin confronts Lewis, and he says basically, if you're really interested in the curse, you're going to have to actually like live with her, and so
Hmm.
he agrees to that. Robin snatches him up, and then you take away Bree's ability to hide her beast form, and so Lewis sees that for the first time. And I loved how vague you were about it, and you kind of
Hmm.
stayed that way, like you described that she has claws, fur, teeth, and she's large. Like that's all that we know.
Hmm.
So it's kind of up to the reader's imagination, which I think is a good idea for a hulking monster. Um,
Hmm.
but so in screenwriting terms, the 3 act structure. This is a very long Act One that just came to an end.
Yeah.
Why why did you want to spend? Why did you want to take? Why did you take this much time before getting to um, the actual story part or the main thrust of the story?
I guess it all comes down to, one of the goals I had with this story was exploring what happens before this point. A lot of Beauty and the Beast stories, like I said, once they go into the house, that's it until they leave, until they've fixed it. And I really, really wanted more. I've always craved more when I've read this fairy tale. Not only the backstory behind who caused the curse, but if they're more involved, there's going to be more to it. Um, and so I wanted, because ultimately there's only so much that happens inside the house. Um, and if the story had started with him going into the house and trying to break the curse, it wouldn't have been very long, at least in terms of what I wanted to tell. So that was always going to be the second half, the things just got real kind of element, where before, he's poking around at this old curse that he only kind of partially believes. He obviously can't really deny what he's seeing, but it doesn't become real, like really real until this moment. The threat, the danger that's going on. Uh, in that regard, it's more like a two act play. Everything that comes before and then everything that comes after. And everything has been building to this moment of him voluntarily deciding, yes, I'm gonna go live here, and I'm gonna break this curse, because it's wrong, and because she means something to me, and uh, you know, because of everything that I've experienced leading up to this moment. Um, and it's in other fairy tales of this. It is much shorter, but a lot of what I wanted to explore myself with this story required more building up to this moment.
So now Lewis is locked inside of the house.
Hmm.
And so chapter 5 is more of a lay of the land chapter, where you're talking about him exploring the. So he explores the house. He meets. First of all, he wakes up um, after passing out inside the first bedroom that he found, and there's like clothes and stuff laid out for him, and he keeps like turning his back, and then more stuff happens. Like he wakes up, there's food,
Hmm.
and he goes to the bathroom. There's a bath drawn. He comes back out, and there's clothes for him. Like if I recall correctly, multiple outfits that he can choose from,
Yeah.
and he so he puts them on. He goes exploring the house. He finds the magic mystic library. Then he goes to dinner with Bree,
Hmm.
and then back to bed. And so, uh, first off, just what all did you want established in this chapter? Like when you started writing it, what were your goals for what you needed to get done?
Well, this chapter kind of falls within the realm of the traditional fairy tale pacing, where right after entering the enchanted castle or the enchanted manor, um, the beauty character explores the house, and that's where the reader really gets an idea of what kind of enchantment is going on here. And so I picked some of the kind of more typical elements of, like, an enchanted, in the Disney version, all of the residents of the old castle are still there, but they're turned into furniture or teapots or whatever, that can still talk and move around. And my favorite version of this has always been a similar idea where everyone who served or lived or worked in the manor was still there in a sense, but not visible. They're more like ghosts, or they're more like just little whispers or things that happen as soon as you turn your back and you turn back around and someone has done the dishes, or what have you. In this case, it's making dinner and putting his clothes out and drawing the bath. That always had a more eerie sense to me than the kind of cutesy, um, and anthropomorphic furniture, and kind of fits with the more haunting, more grim fairy tale element that I was going for with this story. Um,
Yeah, if you're going for a darker vision, a talking teacup kind of gets rid of that
Yeah, it doesn't
immediately.
really. I mean, I suppose it could be really, really terrifying in some ways. I didn't want it to get like Tim Burton creepy. um, so that we kind of established that the fact that the lights kind of lead him around the house and everything's dark otherwise sets kind of the mood of, before, when Bree was in control, the lights were just all on. It was like as much of a magical normal house as you could imagine, and now it's gone completely off the rails, and it's kind of like a sleeping creature, which is how Bree is acting at this point now. She's kind of hiding on the edges, trying to stay out of the way, and so the house is kind of mimicking her there, very confused, very um, uh, kind of trying to hide from sight, but always at the periphery of what Lewis is able to experience. Um, the library here is just real fun for me. I've read Beauty and the Beast stories before, where obviously they had old books, but also books in the future, and I took that a step forward with not only books from the future, but books from different, like, planets, different worlds. Um, so one of the titles is A Journal of Xenobiology, which would be alien um, creatures or plant life. Um, Actually, one of the titles in there is the title of my first fantasy novel, little nugget, uh, which no one would ever know because it's not available for people to read. But it was just a fun thing for me to throw in. Um, and then obviously Zen and the art of underwater basket weaving is just a joke. And later they read it together, and it's
Isn't that
pretty.
actually a book?
I don't know if it is. I suppose I probably should have checked. I mean, there's so many books that any title is going to be possibly a real thing. But I've seen that as like a meme before of basically kind of a hipster way to waste time kind of meme. I don't even remember the context. It was very funny when I first, but this was years ago that I first
I
heard
yeah, I
that.
think I think it's a combination that basket weaving is like the I don't know where it came from, but basket weaving is like the useless college class that people talk about. And
Right.
I know that in I think it was the early '90s there was a book that came out called Zen and the Art of Golf. And it was like this huge bestseller, but just because it was such an odd thing, like it just became a
Yeah.
joke. Like there's a Rugrats episode where the grandfather's inside of a bowling tournament and his son is trying to help, and he has the book Zen and the Art of Bowling.
Oh my goodness.
He
Okay,
just
so
keeps
kind of
like
like
doing
the,
these
the
Zen things. And
XYZ for dummies, Zen and the
mm.
XYZ. Yeah, I didn't know about that, so that's hilarious. Now we have to go find and see if Zen and the art of underwater basket weaving exists. Um, and if it doesn't, then clearly someone needs to write it. Um, so that
Not
was
me. I
the
don't know anything about basket
library.
weaving.
What's funny is like I know some people who've actually done basket weaving, and it's funny that it got kind of slagged as this useless thing. It's hard. Um, I could not do it myself. I don't Probably because I don't have the patience for it. So, um, uh,
That's why I don't art.
let's see.
um, so why did you have that library with all of the futuristic and unpublished and unknown books? What was the thinking
partially
behind making
partially
that thing?
partially an homage to the original fairy tale. There's usually a library of some kind, and the spell affects it in different ways. One thing about being trapped in this castle for centuries, um in many ways the castle is kind of stagnated in time, and in some ways it's pulling in things that are happening. You see this. I think it's in this chapter, it might be in the next chapter, where Lewis is remarking on some of the architecture or some of even the furnishings seem like they're cobbled together from many different years and styles. And um, it's partly trying to be merciful and helpful to Bree, so that she's not just completely reading the same six books over and over again for centuries. But it's also a bit of a taunt, in that she is more aware of what's happening that she is unable to participate in, and being more aware of the world leaving you by. The mirror is a bit like that as well. You can only see a tiny scene, a tiny window into what's going on, but you can see it, and knowing it's out there and you're not able to actually reach it is worse, than being completely oblivious. um, and part of it is she mentions it at one point, when Lewis first meets her, that some of the books are books of magic, that Robin put in there, so that she could try to learn how to control the spell and maybe even break the spell. And that's part of the rules of magic. Eyeless mentions it a couple of times, that being able to pay the cost to create such a spell, one of the rules is it has to be able to be broken. And so having ways for Bree to learn about controlling the castle, or her own appearance, figuring out how it's supposed to be broken. She can't tell Lewis, which is also a traditional element to the story, but she can know. And yet again, knowing something that you can't tell another person, it can be really difficult, and especially when so much is at stake. So it's all kind of a, it helps her, but it also is a torment at the same time, um, which is very kind of classic fairy tale, uh, where everything has a cost, and everything um, can be detrimental if you're not very, very careful.
Yeah. All right. Um, so with the you mentioned how the house was kind of acting like her.
Mm.
She was hiding away and everything. Was was that your intention where it was almost like she still was controlling the house, she just didn't know it, and it was just acting the way that she was feeling?
Sort of, yeah. There are a couple of scenes where Lewis notices from outside that the house looks like an old woman or a creature lurking. And so the house is always supposed to be tied up very strongly with Bree's curse. And she's it's not, I think, so much that she is unconsciously controlling the house right now, but it's more like her ability, the house is always linked to her, and when she can control it, she can manipulate the tie between them. But when that control is broken by Robin, it reverts back to its kind of raw form, where it basically is another element of her beastliness. So it's not that she's controlling it, but it's mimicking what she feels and what she's going through right now. So it's very confused, very dark. um Things are kind of scattered everywhere, much more ominous than when she's in control of it. And when she's in control of the house, that's also when she's able to control herself and what she looks like. So those two are very closely linked. And yeah, that was always intentional. Maybe not when I first started writing the draft, but as things went along, and the um, way I was envisioning Bree developed, that definitely fell into line as well.
All right. Um, so the first time that they had, yeah, this is also the first time that they have dinner. Um, and I like this chapter just because, or this part of it, because I know the original Beauty and the Beast, and how the curse gets broken and all that. And so I liked how this was. It was kind of just, it was the reverse of the actual story,
Right.
where the only rule was you have to was they had to have dinner together every night. um, and Yeah, so what were you trying to what were some ways that you tried to emphasize the gender flip inside of this? Because like I said, that was part of the original fairy tale, so this was
Mm.
the biggest tweak happening here.
Yeah. Well, it was very easy to kind of slip them into these roles. Um, Lewis is Lewis and Bree are both kind of inept when it comes to being in love. Neither of them really realizes what's going on until the very last minute. Um, and they're so caught up in what's going on with Lewis being willful or willingly trapped in this enchanted place with a creature that he's just determined to save. And Bree, who knows what she has to do, but she's very reluctant. Um, she let me flip to the scene um, where right, where Lewis asks her, why do you keep asking me this question? And her response is, because I must. She doesn't want to. She knows what his answer is going to be, even if she doesn't really understand why he's saying no at first. She thinks it's because how could anyone love me? How could anyone want to be with something like me? And that's very part of the traditional story, but kind of it fills, it's not just because she's a monster. She's got a lot of self recrimination and self loathing and self-esteem issues that go back to childhood. And that's a very, I mean, not to say that men and boys don't have self-esteem issues. I think they definitely do. But it's less a trope in fantasy and in fairy tales. Um, you almost, it's always the damsel in distress, or the young, um, the Cinderella type kind of character. And so in that way, Brie fits very, very nicely into this beast character on more than one level. And Lewis, with his history of his aunt trying to matchmake him constantly, now someone's pursuing him again. He can't ever escape from it. And he, in a way, even from the beginning, he's not saying no because I can't imagine marrying you. He's saying no because he doesn't recognize his own feelings for this girl, and he's terrified of them. The only reason he's been showing back up to this house over and over again is because he's developing feelings for Bree. But he's so used to, in a way, his assurance that magic isn't real is very similar to his assurance that I'll never meet the right one. And so his resistance is kind of tied up in that until the very end, where he's like, oh man, I really am in love with her, aren't I? And so in that regard, their roles were very natural with this gender swap, and I didn't feel like I had to push it too hard. And obviously, it's important to the original fairy tale. I don't really know that you could easily write a Beauty and the Beast story without incorporating this element to it in some way. Not necessarily as straightforward as a "Will you marry me? No, no, no" type trope, but it's a very key portion of Beauty and the Beast. Asking for acceptance on this level, um, and eventually giving it is what breaks the spell. So uh, I thought it was pretty fluid to keep it all running together. Um, and half the time, Bree doesn't even give him an opportunity to say no before she's like, "Don't be
Just
afraid of
asks
me
and leaves.
anymore." Yeah, she just assumes it's going to be the answer. And eventually Lewis does stop answering because it's getting harder and harder for him to actually say no because he doesn't want to. So yeah.
It's kind of like when Ron asks Floor to the Yule Ball, where he just sputters it out and then runs away immediately.
Yeah. Oh, what a scene. Oh yeah, that's a good one. But at least he asked. He got up the courage. Good for him.
He did. It's more than most of the guys inside of Hogwarts. Um,
Right.
all right, so then I, I can't remember if um, Jethro is appears inside of this chapter.
He does. He
Okay.
does.
Okay. So I like how you were actually kind of vague about how he got there. You just know that Eyeless did something and
Right.
got him in there. It involved her ring again, which I like that touch where she tried to fight Robin on her own and she lost her toe ring. And Lewis gets it back for her.
Yeah.
And then she loses it again. Again,
Right.
trying to break the curse. Um, so why was it important that Jethro be able to come in here for you?
Well, he is a multiple things. He is the first creature to really shift the spell right before Robin shows up and sends Lewis in. Lewis being able to convince an animal to be near Bree and touch her. That's what causes the first real resonance in the spell that attracts Robin's attention. Um, so his presence there is clearly doing something, and Eyeless sends him for that reason, and also as a living companion for Lewis that isn't a monster or enspelled in some way. um So also because he's well, those reasons, as I just said. They don't know if Jethro is going to be the thing that allows them to break the curse. Obviously not, but he's a step in the right direction. And he's also kind of a loose thread that we leave once Lewis goes inside the house. He's just purchased this animal, and if he gets trapped inside a house, what then? So Eyeless sending him after Lewis is, in a way, a very efficient move, and doesn't leave the reader going, "What happened to the horse?" Because he's right there. So it's also good for Bree because they made so much progress with the birds at first, and then also with the horse. And when Bree loses herself, when she gets turned back into a monster, when they first meet in the library, she admits that she has killed the birds by accident, in her rampage. And so, that progress that they made with live creatures has been completely destroyed. And so having Jethro around will allow them to kind of build that trust back up and that hope of moving. And he does make an impact. They think it's the horse, when they're working on, Lewis is working on training him and getting him closer to Bree, and they start seeing effects like the rain getting through the spell. That's all meant to look like it's the horses working, but really it's, the horse is bringing them together. It's giving them an excuse to be with each other and spend time with each other, and that is what is breaking down the spell.
It's a very clever misdirect.
It's a pretty decent one I didn't really notice I was doing until like after the fact. So I always like those moments. So yeah,
I'm
and
accidentally brilliant.
I'm a genius. Yeah, those are fun. And Eyeless's magic is always meant to be very, very mysterious. We don't really know how it works, or it's not clear cut like Robin's and Mysis's is, in a way, and just not that we understand what their magic is, but we just know that they are magical beings and they can do
Yeah.
stuff.
It's a
Eyeless
very
being,
soft magic system.
yeah. So Eyeless is very tied up in the rings and in what power she's been given by Midas, and Midas, he gave her the rings. So it's all kind of a circle there. Um, uh, Trying to look through and see if there's anything else I want to say about any of that. No, I think that's mostly Jethro's um, role in these chapters.
Yeah. All right. So I'm trying to remember. I didn't take thorough enough notes on this section because I was too into the story.
Always a good thing.
So the was it at the end of this chapter that he gets the note from Isla saying that I found him, him being Midas.
I believe that is actually at the end of chapter 4.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
All
the
right.
end of chapter 4. That's the next one.
Move on to chapter 4.
Brilliant.
Okay. So this one is a little bit more about the building relationship between Lewis and Bree, and you
Mhm.
go into detail about a lot of detail about the horse and leading him around, getting him closer and closer. The spell starts to break down a little bit, like
Mhm.
it rains for the first time ever, I believe, is in this chapter.
It's actually
Um,
at the end of the last chapter, and that's when Bree accidentally claws Lewis.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So that the chapter 4 starts right after that has happened.
Okay. So just stepping back a little bit, why did you have that happen? Why did you need the beastly or it wasn't even a beastly reversal? It was actually more she forgot that she had claws.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just as a way to emphasize how much she's starting to think more and more like a normal human. She even looks human for a minute at the end, like right there in the rain. She's a girl again,
and
but
and it's not the girl she projects either. It's you actually find out it's how she actually looks.
yeah, yeah, and so that's all showing how the curse is starting to dissolve, but it's not broken yet, and the moment she becomes self-conscious, they're, about to kiss, and really, have are standing right there next to each other. She becomes immediately self-conscious of what she actually is, and in that moment reverts to a beast again. And so, a normal human hand, gripping somebody else's arm won't do that. But when you've got, these razor sharp claws, the tiniest, um, in caution, anybody who's got cats, all they have to do is jump on you wrong, and you get, you know, cut a little bit, completely by accident. Um, but she, of course, reads into it way too hard, and, has this meltdown, of I, yet again, I'm unworthy, I'm horrible. But Lewis, it almost, at the beginning of chapter 4, it's almost become kind of it has the opposite effect of him. He could freak out and be terrified of her again, but in a way he's almost more resolved now. The chapter 4 starts, and it says he didn't feel afraid anymore. um and how close they got, and he's starting to get an idea of what he's thinking and what he's feeling now, even though she has hurt him. And I think that is very, a, 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 a similarity to just relationships in general. One of the vulnerable things about them is you're probably going to hurt each other, um, intentionally or unintentionally, and how you move forward from there really defines, what kind of a relationship you have. And so now things are really starting to break down, and they're really starting to get closer together. And Lewis is starting to understand Bree even more. He knows that it was an accident that she hurt him, but he asks her if she knows that. And she doesn't really. She is still to a point so consumed with what she is on the outside that she thinks it reflects who she is on the inside. And Lewis is now trying to get her to get past that, and that's all leading further and further towards the breaking of the curse.
I would also like to say that you nailed Guy pretty well. Where she's like, "Oh my gosh, I hurt you." And he's like, "No, no, it's not a big deal." And then once he gets to his room, he's always like, "I may die."
Oh, I'm so glad. I don't know if my brother will ever listen to this podcast, but he's a very good example of that. Stoic to the end, and then complete drama. So I mean that most lovingly, Brian, Mitch. So
Yeah,
anyway.
I was just like, yeah, this speaks to me. Oh no, no, it's okay, guys, I'm fine. And then then you put any weight on your ankle, and you're like, oh no, actually, that
Nope,
was
nope.
bad.
This is bad. I have made a horrible mistake.
Okay, so this chapter had a lot of fun things. So he goes to the library. Lewis does, and there's a new book there, and it's a highly illustrated fairy tale book essentially.
Hmm.
And so I was curious, are any of those like existing paintings or drawings that you had seen before, or were you kind of coming up with them on the spot as needed? Because you are a painter, so you're much better at doing
Yeah.
something like that than I am.
I'm sure that my subconscious drew them from things I have seen before. At the time when I was writing them, I was just spitting out fantastical scenes. Um, let's see. Probably the only one that I can immediately pinpoint as possibly coming from real life. Um, let's see, a circle. I describe a circle of fairies around a unicorn. I think that is actually a tapestry somewhere, but I don't think they're fairies. I think they're people, and it's like a unicorn hunt. So I'm describing a different scene in terms of the intention, but my memory of that, I think, is what inspired that particular piece.
I I
But
think
the
I
rest
know
of
exactly the tapestry you're talking about,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, it's pretty famous. So I'm sure anybody who's into medieval or Renaissance art and art history would probably at least be able to imagine it. But the rest of them just are, things that came out of imagination, things I would like to paint at
Mm.
some point, but
For
not
the illustrated
necessarily.
edition of the book.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah.
So, how did you go? What was your thinking inside of creating these drawings? As I said, I'm that description is one of my horrible things. Anytime I'm asked to analyze a painting, I can't
Mm,
do anything. So if I have to come up, like I'm writing something right now that I actually did have to come up with a painting that was kind of symbolic for something that was going to happen to one of the characters. And it
mm.
was, I think I stared at a blank page for like a good 30 minutes, just like, what
Oh no.
would symbolize this?
Yeah.
So what were you looking for in describing these paintings or coming up with what they would look like, and what did you want to convey with those?
Well, the book is supposed to be a precursor to the mirror. It shows up as the spell is starting to break down, as Ilis is getting closer and closer to her husband, and it is starting to reflect things that are happening or have happened in the fairy world. Because Ilis and Midas have been around for a really long time. So they are, at this point, they are kind of entrenched, Midas in particular, in this fairy world. And um, Lewis notices a couple of characters in these drawings that look that looks like Eyeless, and there's a guy surrounded by wolves. So, that might be them. And as the chapter progresses, they start to change, where those two disappear, because they are pulling out of the Midas is pulling out of the spell that Robin has trapped him in, and they're starting to come back towards the human realm. So in that regard, it is a bit of a mirror into the fairy world, um, even though it's not as kind of cinematic as the mirror that Bree has, that's showing live, moments in time, even if they are delayed. And so the book is very much pieces and snapshots of what's going on, and half of it Lewis doesn't understand, but obviously when the woman crouched in the leaves and the man with the wolves are no longer pictured in the book, that tells him that something's about to happen. They are no longer in this fairy realm where they've been, and so it's kind of a parallel to what's going on with them outside of the manor.
Um, so another, I wrote down this note. Just I'm curious. Like you mentioned this, and I'm just curious if this is a thing and why. You just said uh, that the candle wax was mixed with honey or something. Is that something people actually do? And what does that do?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've read that before in a couple of other fairy tale books, and I thought that was just such a nice detail. I don't know. I know some beekeepers, and I've never asked them if they've. No, no, I do. I'm lying. I've never smelled one of the candles, but I do have a friend who keeps bees, and she's made candles. One of them, which she included some honey. It's supposed to make the wax burn and smell sweet, kind of like any scented candle. Just a plain beeswax candle is not going to have very much smell at all. But if you add the honey, it's supposed to kind of have a honeyish smell when it burns. Um, so I've always loved that detail. To me, it's such a um, tangible description. I can smell what I think that would smell like whenever I hear someone describe that. Um, so if I was gonna have a beeswax candle, of course it's gonna have to have honey in it.
I hope you enjoyed this continued deep dive into Caitlyn Mitchell's novel Shifted. Next episode, we shall reach the story's end and wrap up the book's discussion. If you want to support Caitlyn and her storytelling, it's as simple as purchasing her books. Shifted and The Roaring Boys are both available on Amazon. If you'd like to support this podcast, please subscribe to it on your preferred podcast deliverer, rate it, and share it with your friends. You can also become a patron on patreon.com/thinkingtoinking, thinking to inking. If you're a writer of a published or a self published book or viewable film or play who would like to appear on this podcast, you can email me at email me. I would love to be emailed if you want to send me emails. You can also email me for information on how to do that. But email me at thinktoinkpodcast@gmail.com. Links to all of the above info can be found in the description, and we will talk to you next time. From Thinking to Inking is a bookworm podcast from Recorded Kid Entertainment. Theme music is an original composition by and property of Hannah Ausband Scheidt. She may be contacted at hannahosbandscheidt.com, HANNAHAUSBANDSCHEIDT.